Welcome to our video on Georgia Lease and Landlord-Tenant laws. As a landlord, it's essential to know your rights and responsibilities to manage your rental property well. With that in mind, here are some important points of landlord-tenant laws in the Peach State. The lease agreement is the foundation of the landlord-tenant relationship. It's a legally binding contract between a landlord and tenant that establishes the terms of the rental relationship. The most common type of lease agreement is a one-year fixed-term lease that terminates at the end of the lease term. This is often referred to as a standard lease agreement. In addition to the terms of the lease, there are some required disclosures that Georgia landlords must include in their lease. Landlords must notify tenants of all managers, individuals, or agents allowed in the property. If the landlord collects a security deposit, landlords must provide tenants with a move-in inspection form documenting any damage to the property at the time that the tenants took possession. If the rental unit has been damaged by flooding at least 3 times in the last 5 years, the landlord must notify tenants in writing of the property's susceptibility to flooding. Pursuant to federal law, if a property was built before 1978, tenants must be provided with a lead-based paint disclosure and pamphlet.
Next, let's talk about key landlord-tenant laws in Georgia. In Georgia, there is no limit on the amount a landlord can charge as a security deposit. However, the amount should be reasonable. The security deposit must be returned to tenants within 1 month of the end of the tenancy. Georgia does not provide specific guidelines about entering a property for non-emergencies, but we always recommend that landlords provide at least 24 hours written notice. Georgia does not have a set limit for late fees. However, the fee should be reasonably related to the expenses incurred due to the late payment. Georgia landlords may require tenants to get renters insurance and can make failure to do so a breach of the lease agreement. We recommend all landlords do this. Return payment fees may not exceed $30 or 5% of the bounce payment, whichever is greater, plus the amount of any fees charged by the financial institution. All Georgia landlords should be familiar with lease termination and renewal laws. Fixed-term leases terminate at the end of the term, unless otherwise stated in the lease agreement. Month-to-month leases can be terminated by the landlord with 60 days notice or by the tenant with 30 days notice. Georgia does not impose a limit on how much a landlord can increase rent. However, the lease should specify the procedures and notice requirements for rent increases. Georgia law requires landlords to maintain the rental property in a habitable condition. This includes ensuring essential services like plumbing, heating, and electricity function correctly. Tenants must promptly notify landlords of any necessary repairs.
Tenants in Georgia have specific rights, including the right to have necessary repairs made in a reasonable time frame. Retaliation by the landlord against tenants is strictly prohibited. If a tenant fails to pay rent or violates the lease agreement, the landlord may initiate the eviction process. When doing so, landlords must adhere strictly to Georgia law, and landlords can never resort to self-help eviction methods, such as changing locks or shutting off utilities. Congratulations, you're now familiar with key lease laws, and you're ready to create your Georgia lease. While the lease laws might sound complicated, keep in mind that our Georgia lease automatically includes all required disclosures and gives you status tips throughout the lease building process. Before you turn over possession of your rental, make sure you've screened all tenants, have an executed Georgia lease agreement, and you've collected the entire security deposit and first month's rent. As you manage your rental, remember that we have over 400 property management forms, including Georgia state-specific forms covering everything from the Georgia flood disclosure to the Georgia 3-day notice to quit. Visit eclandlordforms.com to start your tenant screening, create a Georgia lease agreement that's guaranteed to comply with all Georgia lease laws, and access Georgia property management forms.